The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
And then there's a whole other kind of exposure that happens when you live a life in community, or you're married, or you have children or very close friends who are going to know the versions of you that you aren't going to put in a song. So yes, I think it is helpful to share these things, but you need to be sharing that for the edification of someone else and not your own.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Andrew Peterson stays busy. He's a singer-songwriter. He's the author of the Wingfeather Saga, as well as 2 nonfiction books, Adorning the Dark and God of the Garden. He's the executive producer of the Wingfeather television series. He's the founder and president of the Rabbit Room. He's a sought-after speaker. Also, he was my special guest at a recent Habit Writers Retreat, where he and I recorded the following conversation in front of a live audience. We covered a lot of ground. We talked about how he juggles the roles of musician, writer, and filmmaker, how those roles influence one another. We talked about sharing art out of love for the audience rather than love of self. We talked about the importance of finding or perhaps making creative community. And we talked about gardening. It's always a pleasure to talk to my friend Andrew Peterson. I think you're going to enjoy listening in. Well, we're at the Habit Summer Writers Weekend. We've got a live audience, and we've got Andrew Peterson here. Thank you, Andrew, for being at the Habit Summer Writers Weekend.
Thank you so much for having me. This thing's amazing.
Isn't it great?
Yeah.
Yeah. So our theme this weekend has been musicality and writing. What are the things about the way music works that might be relevant to writing? And you seem like an obvious person to talk about these things because you, of course, do songwriting, you do fiction writing, you do nonfiction, you do drawing, TV, just all kinds of art forms. So I'd love to talk about, that's kind of where I want to start.
Sure. Talking
about those things. And maybe to start with a real practical question, as you go from one art form to the other, is it just sequential? Is it, I'm going to do fiction for a little while, and then I'm going to draw a picture, and then I'm going to do a TV show?
Yeah, that's a good question. I used to try to spin all the plates at the same time, and it turns out not to be a very good idea for me, at least. There's a whole lot of, like when I look back at when I was working on the Wingfeather books, I was, I would do a record and then I would do a book and then a record and a book. But it's like finishing the record doesn't mean you're done with the record. You then got to tour it and promote it and do same thing with a book is, if the book is with a publisher, you've got to do this promotional work. You don't want to let down the people who are trying to help you. And so there was all this overlap. And I just remember, it there were little pockets of time where I was able to focus on just one thing. And those were my favorite bits of it. When it was multiple things, it felt more stressful than fun.
Yeah.
And so I've gotten a little pickier now. Now that I can, I try really hard to just do one thing. That having said that, it still happens. Stuff deadlines come and I get super stressed because people need stuff from me. But I'll just say the best answer I know to that question is it's healthiest, I think, if you've got a couple of you're cooking a couple of meals at the same time, but you've only got one on the burner at a time. You know what I mean? It's like you got the ingredients out here and you've got your stuff, but like you don't want to try to like cook 2 meals at once. You guys have probably done that. It's terrifying. You're always forgetting something and you're frantic and so but while you're cooking that meal, you're going to be thinking about the other stuff that you got to do, and the creative work is still happening in your head.
So, okay, that was a metaphor, but how?
Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How does it? But how does that play out literally? Right? I mean, what does having one thing on the burner and some things off on the side look like?
Yeah.
In literal terms.
Well, it would mean that one of the things, the great gifts of being a songwriter is that you get to spend a good chunk of your year trying to understand what it is that the Lord is teaching you. And so you spend this time with your notebook and your guitar, and you're trying to kind of unearth a little bit of like what's been going on in your life, And so that the kind of songs that I write, the kind of records that I would make tended to be more autobiographical. This is what's going on right now. And so I can look back and see that while I was working very practically in the studio or in like the panic of, oh man, I'm going to be in the studio in a month and I don't have enough songs. I've got to like really knuckle down and try to find the songs. And I'm doing that work of unearthing what's going on. I can see at this, like concurrently, as soon as that record is done and I get to work on the next Wingfeather book, the themes overlap. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like I'm working on an album about grief and suffering. And then it turns out once I get into the next whatever section of the book that I'm working on, my brain is going to gravitate to that stuff. And so I know a little bit more about how the Lord works through grief and suffering than I did before that record. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so that plays itself out in the next thing.
Yeah. No, that was kind of my next question is maybe not in practical terms, but in terms of what you understand about how these art forms work. How does music inform fiction writing, and how does drawing inform fiction writing or nonfiction?
Yeah. I remember, and I could be wrong about this. Justin Gerard is an illustrator that I love, and he was talking about like Renaissance men, quote unquote. People who studied. Like the way he put it was, he was like, there was something about being a better swordsman that made you a better painter. Yeah. And so it was like back then they believed that that all these disciplines end up informing the other ones. And so the best way I know, the best illustration for that is that when I was working on the first Wingfeather book, I got out my sketchbook and so to rewind, when I was in high school, my fondest dream was to illustrate Batman comic books. Like I wanted to be a Batman penciler. I wrote a letter of intention to DC Comics, which is super embarrassing. I probably had doodles of like little Batman things in the margins, so dumb. Anyway, but I was the art guy in my little high school, and I kind of played guitar on the side. But then I interviewed at Savannah College of Art and Design, and that was when I realized that I wasn't nearly good enough at art to make a career of it, or I didn't love it enough to want to do the work that it would take, but I did love playing guitar. So I just kind of like changed courses at that point, but I still loved to draw. But I put away my sketchbook for years. And fast forward 10, 15 years, I'm working on the first Wingfeather book, and I was like, oh yeah, they need some illustrations. I guess I should try to drawing a toothy cow. So I got out my sketchbooks, dusted them off, and I was like, here goes. And it was a better toothy cow than anything I had drawn in high school. And I was like, wait, that's weird. That makes no sense that I haven't been practicing drawing, but I'm better now than I was before. And I wondered why that was. And I think it was that I was old enough to know to have learned the lesson that art is work, that it's not always fun, that you kind of muscle through the boring parts of it if you want to make something good. I had learned to see better than I did before, because songwriting teaches you to see, and you're always scanning the horizon. And I think a lot of it was just patience. Mm-hmm. I wasn't chomping at the bit to finish the thing. Yeah. I had learned over the course of making several albums and working on the first drafts of the book that like art just takes time. And so I was willing to sit and stay up that extra 2 hours when I was working on that sketch in a way that I wouldn't have been in high school. Yeah. So all of these other disciplines had taught me, given me the tools in the toolbox to make me better at this other thing.
Yeah. Was it hard to realize that being the best artist at Lake Butler High School is not the same thing as being the best artist in the world?
Yeah, man. I mean, it was it smarted a little bit, but it was exactly what I needed. Yeah, I remember the guy kind of like looked at my portfolio, and when he finished, he closed it and he said, "None of these are finished. Why not?" And I said, "Probably because I was playing guitar." And I think I literally said that, and he was like, "All right, well, thanks for applying," you know. And that was kind of it. I was like, I guess I'm not going to do this now. Yeah.
Here's the question somebody wrote that I think was. I'd love to hear your answers. Your songs are very honest. You might say confessional. Your stories are too. Do you have any encouragement for writers who are afraid to be honest in their writing? Or are afraid to write because then people will know what their heart really looks like?
No.
Yeah.
Just kidding. No, I would say, well, there's a something I wrote in Adorning the Dark. I don't remember where it is, and I don't know the exact quote, but it's something about how, you know, I learned the peril of asking the Lord if I could write songs that would be a comfort to people who are heartbroken and lonely, because the only way to learn to write those kinds of songs is to go through the valley of heartbreak and loneliness. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to have to experience these things in order to then have the gift to give to someone else. So if that's what you want to do, if your heart's desire is to write things that are going to comfort people in those things, then buckle up, because it's going to be super hard. The lessons come at a cost. And so that's one thing I would say. And then I guess the other thing would be that, you know, I've begun to realize this more the older that I've gotten, that yes, I tend to be pretty confessional, sometimes too confessional, I think, in my songwriting and the books and whatever. But I'm still showing you what I want to show you. You know what I mean? Like I get to make the calls here. And then there's a whole other kind of exposure that happens when you live a life in community, or you're married, or you have children or very close friends who are going to know the versions of you that you aren't going to put in a song, right? Yeah. So they're two different things in some ways. And so yes, I think it is helpful to share these things, but you need to be sharing that for the edification of someone else and not your own. Mm-hmm. That's the key, because if you're you know, you can make the audience your counselor, and that's not what you want to do. I've been guilty of that before, when, you know, singing a song that I just written and I'm crying on the stage, and then everybody feels uncomfortable and it's really weird. Walt Wongren talked about how you need to wait, give it some time, and wait until that part of your story has come to a conclusion and you're talking about it in the past tense, and then you can prayerfully try to steward it for the edification of other people. But you got to be careful not to do that too soon.
Yeah. That's really helpful. Good. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
You surprised me a little bit when you said, when you were putting things in terms of songwriting made your drawing better. I thought you were going to say something the other way around, that drawing required you to be observant in a way that impacted your writing.
Same. Yeah. I think it's
just a big circle.
It's a big circle. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk about, now, you know, there's a level of collaboration involved in TV making that's, yeah. I mean, I know you have you know, as a band leader, there's plenty of collaboration in your life, but this is a whole
different thing. Yeah.
Level. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to have this? What these stories are? 15 years old? They've been Andrew Peterson stories for 15 years, right?
I guess the first one came out in 2008.
Yeah,
and I started writing it 5 years before that.
Yeah. So it's been it's been your thing, and now it's not just your thing.
Right.
Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, it's an incredible joy.
Yeah.
It just has, like somebody was asking me this morning actually about, are there things in the books that I like better than, things in the TV show that I like better than the books? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Like we refined the story in a way that I was like, gosh, I wish I'd thought of that when I was working on these books, and especially the first book. The first book's, I can feel myself figuring out how to tell a story in that book, and you figure it out, and the rest of the series rides a little smoother, I think. But yeah, there for sure, there are times when I have to put my foot down. Like I get some veto power as one of the executive producers, which is a pretty hoity-toity word for just meaning I get to be in the room for these decisions. And so, I have a little bit of power, but I also don't want to nag anybody. And I've learned well enough to that all these ideas are good ideas, and like if you're hiring people at the top of their game to come in and help your story be better, good grief, listen to them. Yeah. And so I've been doing that, but then I save up my points, for a moment when I'm like, that can't happen. This is not how she should say this. And there have been a few times where, there's a price tag that's attached to all of those decisions. So like if the animators have created a scene and they've got it edited and they've got it in the thing, and then I see the final thing, and there's something about the way an actor delivers a line that is just bugging me and it's not right, I know that that's going to mean there's a $sign attached to them going back and changing all of that, right?
So you have to pay them both times?
Oh, yeah. And you pay them financially, but you also pay them in, like, you only get so many of those before people start to not like working for you. And so now with season 2, I've learned a lot about, like, speak up early. Like there's a lot of the process that I'm new to. And so I didn't realize that there was a $sign attached to some of these decisions. And so now I'm like, yes, let's get it in the animatic, or let's get it, like, change the way they said, like, when they record the vocals for something, they'll do several takes. And so they're letting me go through and listen to them all before it's animated and say, hey, this one isn't right. Can you find an alt? And they'll dig up another line. And so that the animators are then working to that vocal performance, which is the way they want to work. The vocal performance tells them where their hand gestures are going to be and what their posture is going to be like. And so if you change a line to another performance and suddenly it doesn't jive with the way the animation looks, it is a complicated process. Yeah. Like we watched last night, we were at this homeschool convention, and I was in the room and we showed them episode 1. And I was just sitting there thinking the whole time, these people have no idea how much work this was. There's no way you can know how much work it is to put something like, not for me, for the team. Right. Like I worked hard, but like I'm thinking about the countless hours. We had 90 some odd people at the peak of the production. That's how many people were working on the show, and 90 families with health insurance and whatever, and like these people are working full time at the top of their game, and there's a lot happening. And for Chris Wall to shepherd that whole thing to a 22-minute episode that you can kind of watch while you're eating popcorn, it's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah. So it changes the way that I watch all movies. It's like give thanks anytime a movie is not terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some movies that I had every reason to think they were going to be really good. Yeah, because I knew the people. They're smart people. Yep,
and you can see now how the wheels can come off.
Yeah,
just a few things that happen, and money's involved, and too many cooks in the kitchen, and then this beautiful thing can just kind of fall apart.
Yeah,
and so whenever it works, it's just it's miraculous almost. Yeah.
What's an executive producer?
I think Chris Wall described it. How do I put it? Like they're kind of like the. I'm not a sports guy. First thing that popped in my head was like you're like the coach. Like they're doing stuff, but somebody's got to be there to. Okay, here's a a possible good answer. I saw Martin Scorsese on David Letterman a long time ago, and David was like, "What does a director do anyway?" And Martin Scorsese said, I just make about 10,000 little decisions every day.
Yeah.
And like somebody's got to be the person that everybody kind of looks to and is like green or red.
Yeah.
And somebody goes green, And so the executive producer, like I'm not in that kind of decision making chair, but there's a version of that where where somebody's got to decide which vocal performance is the one, or like which is the script when is the script finished? And so I get to be one of the few people that say, all right, this is it. Let's go forward.
Yeah. I thought about you the other day. I was watching a movie in which there were two people working in a weed store, and one was a writer, and he'd never finished a script. And the other one said she was an executive producer, but she worked in this store. She had never executive produced anything. But the other guy had never finished anything.
Producer. Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know.
That was good.
But you actually have executive produced something, so good job.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not saying I want to do it again. This
isn't your new career.
This. I care about this deeply because I care about wanting to give the Wingfeather Saga the best shot to be good. For a long time. And so, but after this is over, I'm going to be like, oh man, I you have to care so much about the little details. Mm-hmm. So I admire so much the guys that are men and women who are like hired guns, who come in to work on a thing and they've got to really care about these details, but it's not their baby. Mm-hmm. That's amazing to me. It's so professional and admirable that they can pour themselves into this work like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. I want to change the subject just a little bit.
Yeah.
One thing we were talking about earlier today was the idea that in music there's a combination, or in a song there's a combination of words with lexical content, and then there's everything else. The rhythms and just everything else that goes into that I don't even really have the language to talk about very well. And in prose, or in, let's just say prose, there's also the lexical meanings of the words and all the other stuff. And the combinations are different, right? I mean, I think in a song, maybe the percentage occupied by the lexical meaning is maybe, a smaller percentage of the whole.
Sure.
But if that distinction makes sense to you, and if it doesn't, we can do something else. But can you talk about what you've learned as a writer of prose, both fiction and nonfiction, about those other things, whether it's rhythm or even emotional beats or whatever that it's not lexical.
I'm not sure it's going to be a terribly interesting answer, but I will say I do care. My favorite writers are the ones that you can read out loud, and there's a musicality to their what they do. Annie Dillard is one of those. Like I like how she bounces back and forth between these big grandiose sentences and these little quick punchy ones, so there's that. It feels like there's a surprising element to it. Like she's playing with it a little bit. Buechner is that way. I think Buechner has these just amazing long sentences without commas. Somehow he gets away with not using commas very much, but you know what he means, and you're delighting in the shape of the thing as much as you are in what it is that he says.
Yeah.
Sometimes more than others, but man, when the two come together, that's when something really special happens. When like the meaning of the thing and the feeling of it rolling off your tongue harmonize. There's something really special. I would just say that when you're writing a song, obviously it's all out loud, like it's all music, and you mutter the lyric again and again and again to try to find the right bounce, and ideally, people always ask which comes first, the lyrics or the music, and the answer is it's always different, but when it's the best, it's when it happens at the same time, when it like both of them come out of your mouth. You can say a phrase that has this inherent rhythm to it that also comes out with a melody that you can kind of sing, and you can build a whole song on that. You know what I mean? You get that, and it's special, and you can be like, oh, well, there's the thing. And then the second verse, you're trying to like mimic this magic that happened in the first verse, you know? And then the third verse, you play against it a little bit. They were one of my favorite things that Ben said. I loved the episode where you interviewed Ben, but one of the principles where like the listener wants... Ben Shive, yes. Go listen to it if you haven't. It's so good. But Ben has just got this amazing mind, ability to convey things in a colorful way that you're like, oh, I know exactly what you mean. But he was just talking about how the listener wants to be right 75% of the time, right? Like if the song is all over the place, you're just kind of lost, you know? So you want some kind of pattern, but then you want the pattern to surprise you by the end of verse 2. That's what a bridge is kind of for. A bridge veers you off the path and disorients you a little bit so that when you come back to the path, you've got some fresh information. So thinking of songwriting that way, where there's this, you're constantly thinking about how does this sound? How does this feel when I say it out loud? Right? Meant that before after I remember with the first Wingfeather book, you had sent me back, I had sent it to you to read. You gave me this very generous edit of it way back then. And then I sat up, I was so scared to send it to my editor. Because I was just like, I don't know how to do this, but I just wanted to make it as good as I could before she tore it to pieces. And I read the whole thing out loud to myself in a British accent up in my office. I really did. It took me a week or two probably, but I read and that was when I was like, oh, the sentence is terrible, and you'd fix the sentence. I wanted it to be a good read aloud book. And so I was very conscious of trying to make it so that that's when you know if the sentences are working. So is when you hear it out loud. That's when you hear the musicality of it. So I highly recommend that. Like, I hadn't read this little story out loud until, I shouldn't bring that up, should I? Anyway, does that help? I don't know if that gets to your question.
Okay, now I'm putting you on the spot, but can you remember a song that maybe these folks would know that started out with one of those perfect phrases? Where the music and the words came simultaneously?
It's just kind of an embarrassing answer, but Is He Worthy was one of those songs. It was, I have the voice memo. Really? Yeah, I think I'm in an airport and I'm going, we do. It's just kind of embarrassing, but I could imagine that
it was the we do that was.
Yeah, it was the answer.
You didn't have the words.
I might have had, do you feel the world is broken? We do. I might have had that first one, and but it was like this very clear question and answer thing. But also the da da dun da dun da dun dun. All the verses follow that same rhythm. Yeah. That first line, that's exactly how you would say it. Yeah. Like phrasing is such an important part of songwriting, and I feel like it's one of the things that gets overlooked in a lot of modern Christian worship songs. One of my proudest things is that Sky is just like, brutal when it comes to phrasing. Like she just cares about it so much. She'll work so hard on phrasing, and I'm like, that's my girl. But yeah, like the way you say the word, you don't want, like a quick example of a time when Fernando Ortega taught me this lesson was I had in the song Gather Round Ye Children Come, from Behold the Lamb of God. It was the first song in Behold the Lamb. And the way that I was trying to keep it as close as I could to Philippians 2, which is the passage of scripture that one kind of dances around. And I had sung, I'm going to forget I can never do this on the spot. Christ Jesus reigns with the angels. Because that was what it said in the version of the Bible that I was basing it on. Christ Jesus reigns, whatever. It doesn't say reigns with the angels. I took some liberty with that. But I sent it to him, or I played it for him, and it was like, you want the name Jesus to be the thing that you're saying, not Christ Jesus reigns with the, because you're having to mumble the word Jesus, because you're saying Christ loudly. Christ Jesus reigns with, so he's like, so now I changed it to Jesus, he reigns with the angels. And I love singing that a whole lot more, right? Yeah. So like thinking about the phrasing, like you can play, there are all these little tricks, like you add he in there to give you the rhythm. Jesus, he reigns with the angels. It wouldn't have been as good if it had been Jesus reigns with the angels. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? And that's something that I learned from James Taylor and Paul Simon I mean, the song Copperline by James Taylor is just like a masterful picture of playing with the language to get the rhythm to bounce, you know? Copperhead, Copper Beech, Copper Kettle sitting side by each. He says copper kettle sitting side by each instead of by each side. Not only does it rhyme, but it feels better. And it's surprising. It's like, wait, why would you say side by each? Because he's James Taylor, dadgummit. So like learning to play with the words, you know, there was a playfulness in a lot of James Taylor's songwriting that I loved, internal rhymes and that kind of stuff. So anyway, yeah, that can be distracting in prose. I will say that last thing I would say, and you guys may know what I'm talking about. When I would go sit at the coffee shop down the road and work on, I had a 2,000 word a day goal. I wouldn't let myself eat lunch until I'd written 2,000 words. And so sometimes it'd be 2:00 and I was starving and I would just write anything, you know. and there were days when I would close my computer and I'd come home and I'd feel really good about what I'd written that day. And because I was just like, you know, I was like, oh, I'm such a writer, you know, like sentences. So the first thing I would do the next morning is reread what I did yesterday, and that would kind of get the ball rolling, and I'd write my next 2,000 words. And every single time, without fail, the days when I felt like I was really a writer, I would come back the next morning and it would be really bad because it was florid, or it sounded like I was trying too hard. But then the days when I was just punching in a clock and saying, this thing happened, and then this next thing happened, and then the guy said this, and then she said this, and I was just telling the story in about as plain a way as I could tell it, because I wasn't inspired. I would come back the next day and I would think, this reads like an actual book.
Because when the marker is how I feel about what I just did, that's a
you're in trouble. That's a red flag.
That's your red. Yeah.
If you're feeling super pleased with yourself, like I remember David Wilcox, the songwriter, who's like, I think of him as the Yoda master of songwriting. Yeah. He's kind of hermetic. I don't know if that's the right hermit-like. Lives off in the. He doesn't really live in a swamp, but I imagine that he lives in a swamp. But he talked about one time I was listening to him talk about songwriting. He talked a lot about how when he was young, he used to try to be clever. And I was like, what's wrong with being clever? Like, you know, being clever is part of the fun of songwriting. You know, he's surprising people to whatever. And now that I'm older, I completely see what he means. Like you're showing off. Yeah. And I have old songs where I'm showing off and I don't like singing them. Yeah.
The world is sufficiently surprising that if you just tell what you've seen,
yes,
originality sort of takes care of itself, and cleverness takes care of itself. Yeah. I mean, you grew up in Florida, you know this.
Yeah, I do know this. Well, it's like, and if you're talking about the gospel doesn't need our help. Yeah. You know, it doesn't need us to make it more beautiful. Even C.S. Lewis with the Narnia books, like he didn't make the gospel more beautiful. He reframed some things to surprise us with the actual beauty of the actual gospel, you know? So you just got to tell about it. One sentence after another, and don't try to be clever.
Yeah. Right. Can we talk about community rootedness? I mean, you have a long history of sort of creating spaces where people can flourish. Relationships and of course, you know, the habit, that's something we're super interested in doing. And I had, you know, one person write in a question specifically asking about finding or creating community, especially creative community. This person was asking about, you know, if you move around a lot, but I think we can also say if you live in a place where you feel like it's hard to find that kind of community. I mean, and we don't have to limit this to creative community, but
sure. What is the question?
I'm teeing you up to talk for you to say.
Oh yeah.
No, I mean, I've often heard you say. I think I've heard somebody say in the rabbit room world that sometimes it's not a matter of finding community. Sometimes you just have to make it to be the.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever said that, but I don't disagree with it. It's really tricky. I remember the very first Touch Moot. We had a panel where we were talking about community, and somebody raised their hands and said, "Well, good for you. You live in Nashville. Like there's, everywhere you go, there's somebody with a CD in their trunk." And so they kind of stumped us. I remember kind of thinking, oh, we're going to have to do some thinking about what is the answer to this, because you can't just come to Hutchmoot every year, and like that's a Band-Aid. So the best answer that I have come up with is, especially regarding creative community, is that you should start a project that is more than you can do by yourself. Like bite off more than you can chew, and you'll have to find people to help you. Put it on the calendar, reserve the venue, and or whatever, announce the release date, the thing, and force yourself to do something that is more than you can do. And I guarantee you that by the time you get to the thing, the big project, the debut of the thing that you're trying to work on, you'll look up and you'll realize that you've got a whole bunch of people around you that you didn't know before. I think that's the way it works. And that's how it's been with almost all of the friends that I have. It has been people that got roped into some crazy idea or whatever. And a lot of that is just me kind of being lonely and wanting to do stuff with people. A lot of that too is my sweet wife, who's in the room right now, who is, responsible for most of the gracious, beautiful things that I experience in my life. She's the one who often will make the call and track down the people and say, hey, we're having so-and-so over for dinner on Thursday night. I would have gone 2 months before I made that phone call. Yeah. But she makes the phone call, and I find myself sitting at a table with these friends, and it wouldn't have happened unless somebody had roped me into their dream. Right? Yeah. And so I think that's the best answer that I know.
Yeah. All right. Last question, or last constellation of questions.
I like your hand motion.
Yeah, you like that?
You're like a super villain.
Those were twinkling stars. In God of the Garden, God of the Garden, you talk about the importance of getting your hands dirty. And you say that gardening is at the core of what we were made to do and to be. Tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm very much an amateur gardener. I'm not a real gardener, but I like to be outside. I'm almost always outside. Every morning I wake up and I go on a walk, and I can't stand it if I can't go do this thing and interact with the given world. Just yesterday I was talking to a young man who asked me what I thought of Christian video games, and it was a good question. There's a whole lot of creativity that happens with video game making, and I have people who are friends who are gamers who tell me that, like, oh, you don't understand, it's like an amazing way to tell a story. It's like the new amazing way to tell a story. And I've talked to people who've cried while playing fill in the blank. I just don't get it. But I'm also not going to say that it's all bad. I don't know I'm not an expert, but I did tell the guy, if you are the kind of person who is going to have a tendency to stay inside and play a lot of video games, you need to put some practice in your life that gets you away from them too. Like, find a way to balance out your life so that you are, because the lure of the video game is to take you out of the given world and into an imaginary one, and you've got to fight back at that really hard. And I'm very wary of like the wing feather thing. Like, there are game companies that want to make video games out of wing. We've done like a Roblox game, and we had a meeting where I kind of told the person, I was like, I don't want to ever make a game that isolates anyone. Like, if we're going to make a game, make it so that you have to play it with somebody else. Make it so that it's an experience the dad can have with his son or his daughter or whatever. And so the point is, there are a whole lot of things clamoring to take us out of the given world. And you're so good about delighting in the world that the Lord has made. I've learned a lot of that from you. But it's not going to happen accidentally. There are a whole lot of the technology is just encroaching all the time. So you just have to put practices in your life that are going to break the spell on a regular basis. And so for me, that has been taking care of the land and gardening and getting my hands dirty, chainsawing stuff up and making trails, whatever. And now that I have a granddaughter, Almost everything we do on the property is with grandchildren in mind. Like we want to create a world that will delight them.
Yeah.
And we're not going to create that world. Obviously,
Right.
It's going to do its own work, but we want to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah.
And that's one of my, sorry, I'm going off, but there's a writing principle that fits this conversation. Like if there are, the Stephen Pressfield thing where he talks about the resistance, there's this resistance that wants you to not make stuff. So remove as many obstacles as you can to the making of stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like don't make it so that you've got to go super far to work on the thing you want to work on. So the analogy in my mind is we had this big white oak tree. The year we moved into our house, huge, beautiful grandfather white oak tree fell and just reached the end of its life. And it was so sad. So I'm a cheapskate. So I thought rather than call a tree company, I'm going to buy a chainsaw and a maul and a sledgehammer, and I'm going to take this tree apart. It's going to spend $500 instead of $4,000 or whatever. And so I spent the summer taking apart this tree, cutting it up. And there were days when it would be 90 degrees, 95 degrees, and I would look out the window and be like, man, I got to go all the way to the shed and get the chainsaw, and I got to find them, whatever. So I went to Walmart and I bought a big tub that would fit my chainsaw and the gas can, and I put it next to the tree so that when I went on my morning walk, I could decide on a whim to spend 5 minutes hacking away at this big tree. Does that make sense?
That's good.
So to try to
love it.
put things in your life that are going to make it as easy as possible for you to engage with the given world, to do the work that you don't really feel like doing.
That's great.
Remove those obstacles. So
Thank you for using the word given world, the phrase given world.
I think I got that from you.
Okay.
I'll blame you for it. But it is. Yeah, you're welcome. But no, it is like this bottomless source of delight and wisdom. And that when I say this all the time, forgive me for repeating it, but the idea that the Lord, the ancient Christians used to say, the Lord has given us 2 books of Revelation, the book of Scripture and the book of nature. So if you want to know what the Lord is like, read your Bible and pay close attention to the world that He's made, because He's always speaking through it. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And so why would we not pay attention?
Yeah. Thank you. You've given me lots of reasons to pay attention through the years, and I really appreciate it.
Same.
So thanks. This has been great having you.
Thank you.
I'm going to open up to some questions, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So you talked about being playful with your phrasing or in writing, and also about not trying to be clever, and about, making things fit the rhythm or rhyme, but not making it feel forced. And that feels like a really tricky thing to balance. So I'm just curious what you would say to that.
Yeah. That's why songwriting is not for the faint of heart. If it was easy, everybody would do it. No, I don't. Yeah, there's the balance. And I think that the answer to that is doing the work of studying the great ones, figuring out how they did it. I don't know how it works with prose, but with songwriting, it's like when I was younger, if I was stuck and I couldn't think of anything to write about, I would go, I'm going to write a Rich Mullins song today, or I'm going to write a Bruce Springsteen song today, or I'm going to write a James Taylor song. And I would listen to what they were doing, and I would try to just steal the way they were doing it, and chord progressions, whatever, and I finished the song, and it's very different from what they would have done, but it got me into it. But by studying the really great ones and figuring out who lights you up and what makes it, what are you noticing about what they're doing, it gives you this internal kind of platonic form of song to hold your work up against. And so you learn some discernment that way. So you learn to tell, this is just going to be annoying to a listener, or this is going to delight a listener because whatever. Does that make sense? And for me, a lot of that has been co-writing and working with writers who are better than me, like Ben Shive and Andy Gullahorn and people like that who, when the people that you're playing your first version of the song for are heroes, people who are really good, then you listen, they help, they call you on your blind spots. Does that make sense? So it is tricky for sure. And you probably, here's the other thing, and we've talked about this, is that you don't let that worry that you might be being too clever or too playful in this moment stop you from just trying to do it. Like, just go do it a lot. And you'll look back, I guarantee you, in 10 years and cringe at whatever you're writing right now. And it's okay. You have to write that stuff. You have to do it. So, you can only learn that stuff by doing a lot of it. Yeah.
The only way to the good stuff is through the bad stuff.
Yes.
Maybe one or two more questions. Anybody else?
You just were talking about how to try to take the obstacles and like work those out. It's great we have something to do with the tree now, but maybe like in terms of writing or songwriting, what are a couple of the biggest obstacles you face and how have you tried to negotiate those?
It's as simple as putting the guitar on a stand and not keeping it in the case. So whenever I'm in songwriting mode, which has been a few years since I've in earnest worked on a record, I go through this ritual of taking the guitars out of the case, putting one in Dad-Gad, which is the tuning I usually use, and then standard tuning, and I put them so that they're staring at me like gargoyles from the other side of the room. One practical thing that I think is that if you have a piano in your house, never close the lid on the piano. It's especially if you have kids, because the kids are going to walk by. I heard it happen so many times. The kids would walk by and go bing bonk 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 bonk, and then you would hear them stop and come back to the piano and go bonk 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 bink, and then they're standing there for 5 minutes goofing around on the piano. So the same kind of thing happens. And then the other practical thing is this app called Self Control, which I could not have written the books without it. It's a free app. It's really tiny little app that you turn on and you tell it Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever the websites are that are the distractions for you. And you set a timer for anywhere from 15 minutes to 4-6 hours or whatever. And when you turn it on, you cannot go to those websites, even if you restart your computer. That it locks you out of the distractions. And so
but you get your phone out though.
That's the other thing. It's but then Jamie has the passcode to my phone. So with Instagram, I have a limit on how long I can look at Instagram in a day. So once that's gone, I can't get to Instagram. So I just put things in place in my life that protect me from myself. Yeah. So the funny thing about self-control is that I blocked all those social media stuff, and I would turn it on, and then I'd be like, I wonder how hot it is outside today. Anything. Your brain is just scanning the horizon for a distraction. And I was everything in me needed to know exactly what degree it was outside. So I would go to the thing and be like, oh, it's 89. I guess I got to write my book now, So I added the weather, whatever, to so news apps, all the things. So there's this growing list of websites that I don't want to go to. So, yeah.
Maybe one or two more questions. Anybody else?
You talked about this in Adorning the Dark, but I wonder if you could speak into the tension between using your art as a means to belong and using your art as a means to extend belonging to others.
It sets a table for other people. And so the more you can see your art as a way to love people, the better off you'll be. The caveat to that is you can't wait until those motives are pure before you start doing stuff. Can I tell you one little story about that will illustrate what I mean? And maybe we can close with this. Yeah. There's a guy named Brown Bannister who teaches music and production at Lipscomb in Nashville, and he produced Amy Grant's records and just is a legend in Nashville. This wonderful human being, gentle soul, and when we were packing up Aiden to move him to college years ago. He's now a dad, so I don't know what the timeline was like. But I was just overwhelmed with regret. We had like a prayer time for him. Our friends came over. We all prayed over him, and I wrote a song for him. We read letters to all the family, read letters to him to just kind of send him off on his great adventure. And I was a mess. Couldn't stop crying because all I could think about was this amazing human being who's grown up in my house is leaving now. And I don't think it all happened so fast. And every night I was watching Netflix I could have been hanging out with him. You know, every show that I had that took me away. How many plays did I miss? My brain was kicking around with all of these terrible regrets. And so Aiden, of course, who's very kind, he was just like, Pops, you know, you're being hard on yourself. Like you're a good dad. It's okay. And Jamie was saying, Andrew, you're a good dad. You don't need to stop beating yourself up. I was like, no, it's fine. I know, but I'm just so sad. And so, you know, it was okay. But then the next morning, you know, we're packing up his car and taking him to Lipscomb, which is only 20 minutes away from here. It's pathetic, right? And so we're bumping into all of these parents who've driven in from California, and they're crying. They're like, it's so hard. I was like, I know, it's so hard. So anyway, all that to say, I just kept feeling this. You know, I would talk to people, and the answer that I kept getting was, oh, you're a good dad. Don't beat yourself up. And it never helped. It didn't make me feel any better. And then I bumped into Brown Bannister, and he was like, oh, how's it going? And I was like, oh man, it's so bad. I'm so plagued with regrets and so much shame, whatever. And he laughed and he said, oh man. He was like, I remember feeling that. It has been so fun to see all the ways the Lord has redeemed my mistakes over the years. And he didn't let me off the hook. He didn't say, oh, you're a perfect dad. He said, well, of course you're not a perfect dad. Like, why are you so shocked that you're not a perfect dad? You shouldn't be shocked. None of us should be shocked when we realize we're not great people, right? The good news is, the gospel is that the Lord redeems. He's always working to redeem that in us. And so when it comes to your writing, you could be plagued by like this, am I doing this to belong? Am I doing this for self-actualization? Like, you know, all the things. Or you can just write and trust that one day you're going to laugh like Brown Bannister and say, oh man, it's been so fun to see the ways the Lord has redeemed my bad motives, all the wrong reasons I wanted to write my book, all the whatever, and he has made good of it. That's our only hope, right? So yeah, that's what I would say.
Andrew Peterson, thanks so much for being here tonight.
Thank you. Good to talk to you.
This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com. And to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.